So thank you, Louise. Thank you for being with me live. And
It's so cool.
It's working in the group.
Do you know what I'm doing? I'm just like dropping into the group and I'm just inviting everyone as well. There we go. Put my phone down now.
So, Louise, thank you for being here live.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me, Jill.
I love it when the tech works.
I know. So exciting. I've not done this before. I've not done a Zoom live thing before.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So, right, we're here today to talk about mindfulness. And I know that you've started your teacher training in mindfulness.
I did.
And that you've got a great history in mindfulness. And I've experienced mindfulness with you in practice. And what I'd like to ask you is, did you start getting mindfulness by way of doing courses or as a recipient? So were you interested in it in terms of sharing it, or was it purely for you to begin with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, yeah, initially it was absolutely purely selfish. It was, I discovered, if you like, mindfulness in the formal context about 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
And it was originally when, and I know she's a bit Marmite, but Ruby Wax started to publicise and do quite a bit of work around mindfulness and really raising the profile. And I read her first book, which was called A Guide for the Frazzled, which is a great title. And it really sparked my interest. And there were some really practical kind of exercises in there.
Right.
And I started to realise, because I've always had anxiety, I started to realise that this could actually be a thing. This could actually really help. And then sort of like dipping in and out of it, it kind of I started to notice some subtle changes to, you know, the way in which, I think it was more about the way in which I approach my anxiety rather than it actually dealing with the anxiety itself.
Yeah.
But that just sort of made all the difference for me. So about 3 years after that, I then first enrolled on my first MBSR course.
Right.
It kind of went from there.
So after doing some mindfulness from the book, did you stay with what you learned from the book and doing it on your own, or did you go to a class where you experienced being led yourself in mindfulness?
Yeah, so I started to do the bits in the book, and what I really, really loved about the book, and I still love to this day, and I sort of talk to all of my audience about, is the fact that we can really incorporate mindfulness into our everyday living. We don't have to, you know, it's more about how we can find ways to live mindfully and be mindful rather than adding it or creating time in our day to be able to do it, if that makes sense. And that's what I loved about the book. So I dipped in and out of it for quite some time. Now, of course, like everybody, like life happens.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd do bits and then forget about it and then go back to it and forget about it. But I think it was when I first enrolled then on a formal program, a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we call it MBSR. That was sort of a couple of years after that. That's when my practice started to become more formal, I would say. And there was, I think one thing about that is it helped me to just find a routine with it and just feel a bit more committed to it as well.
Right. So that was quite a journey then, that started from a book.
It really did. Started from a book, and it's just, I went to see Ruby Wax a couple of years ago. She does tours as well, and I got the opportunity to meet her, which was lovely, and
Wow.
told her about, you know, and I think like many in the audience, because she does like a Q&A,
Yeah.
the impact that that one little book had, you know, and I think what I liked about it, again, it just spoke to me in the sense that it was making it relatable.
Yeah.
It was making it seem as though this was absolutely something that could be, as I said, brought into everyday life, and can also be, I think one of the principles around mindfulness is that you find a way just to allow things to happen in their own time and allow the journey to just unfold very naturally, very organically. So it's not like having to consume all the information.
Yeah.
And that's what I've found really different about this journey, and what I've also really enjoyed about it as well. You start to embody
Yeah.
that mindfulness rather than just it's something that you do.
Yeah. And there's a big difference when you move from doing something to embodying it.
Yeah, there
It,
is.
it changes it really deeply, doesn't it?
It really does. And you know, it's an ongoing process, an ongoing journey, and will be, you know, as the Buddha has talked about in the Buddhist philosophy, this is life is, you know, a journey.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been more so, I guess, as I've moved towards my teacher training now, it's a really deep commitment that I've made with myself more than anything, because you know, you, to be able to be guiding and teaching others, you really need to be that embodiment.
Yeah.
And the guidance of the meditations as well have to come from here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know mindfulness is used a lot as almost a trendy word these days. How do you see the mindfulness that you practice as different to what's seen as trendy?
This is a really interesting one, because I mean, I would say that probably the way a Buddhist would look at mindfulness is slightly different to the way I would look at it, to the way that somebody else would look. You know, it's very, and it's always that $1 million question when someone says, "How do you define mindfulness?" And I think for me, it's not something we do. It's a way of being. That's what I would say is the first distinction for me. So some of the trendy stuff is more around the practice of,
Right.
which is absolutely okay. I think that's part of it. But for me, it's also a state of mind as well as the practice. And that's where it differs from just the doing to the actual being as
Yeah.
well. And like you've already said, the embodiment of it is on a deeper level.
Yeah.
But I just pulled out earlier this quote, definition, because I always go back to this in the program that I teach. It's by John Kabat-Zinn. So he's like the founder of, I would say, like what I would say is modern day mindfulness, which is like from the 70s.
Right.
And he describes it as mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And I quite like that. It's sort of all encompassing.
Yeah.
As a sort of a definition. So there's this idea that we're really in that state of mind of being in the present moment on purpose.
Yeah.
But also not judging things.
Yeah. And not judging self either.
Yeah, and acceptance and compassion is an important part of the sort of mindfulness that I teach as well, because it's really about just exploring things with a sense of openness.
Yeah.
and just being with whatever's there.
Yeah. How do you think it's mindfulness has changed in terms of when it was first talked about to now with the neuroscience that's involved?
Yeah, I was going to say the neuroscience is the biggest factor. I think because so the work that John Kabat-Zinn did was sort of came around in the 70s. Now, obviously, his work was very much based on some of the Buddhist philosophy that very much underpins some of the teaching that I do. It's very evident that it's there.
Yeah.
However, we've now got this coming together of the sort of contemplative traditions, and not just Buddhism, like Christianity and all sorts of other religions have elements of prayer and meditation and mindfulness. But it's sort of all those contemplative traditions coming together now with this neuroscience. And I think the neuroscience now makes it more tangible for people.
Yeah.
I think that people can very much see the results. I mean, just take, for example, what I teach the MBSR is the whole point around it reducing stress.
Yeah.
So the neuroscience now shows that, and we know about neuroplasticity now as well. So it really can demonstrate that we can physically change, our sort of responses to stress. And I think even things like it's shown to improve memory, reduce pain, and chronic illness.
Yeah.
So it really, it's the empirical sort of evidence that it's providing now, and we're over the last few decades now starting to see the results of that scientifically.
Yeah. So it's almost like science has caught up.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, isn't it, how science does actually seem to embrace mindfulness. And I just find it really fascinating how those two worlds actually do meet in the middle on this particular subject.
I know. And I often think when you look back at mindfulness right at its beginning of source, then if the knowledge of the neuroscience was there, I really believe it would have been used. And I don't see any problem in showing the what neuroscience backs up for the intangible.
Yeah. I think it's great because I think it's part of what makes it feel more accessible for people. It sort of speaks to people on a level that they understand. Most of us just understand communication in terms of our problems that we want to solve, don't we? So we're feeling stressed, we're feeling overwhelmed, we're physically in pain, all of these things. So then to bring the sort of scientific evidence to that, to show and demonstrate to people how this can help them, just starts to really open up the field all of a sudden. And this is why MBSR in itself was created for the masses, if you like, created for the general public to be able to access.
And it's not so much about proving it works, because anybody that is embodying it or even practicing will know that it works, and the people around will see the difference in that person. So it's not a matter of, oh, I need something to prove it. It just sits nicely with it, doesn't it?
It does. And I think as humans though, we also do like the stats, don't we? We like the numbers. We like I think it's just how we've been conditioned, isn't it? Through, the emergence of science over the since the Victorian era or whatever. and how things are printed and shared with people in
Yeah.
terms of like, you know, it will help you with reduced by this much, or, you know, so many thousands of people have experienced this, or, you know, we just like to see the numbers and the impact. And I think that you know, the work that they're doing, so the work that sort of John Kabat-Zinn started is in Massachusetts, the University of Massachusetts, which is the
Right.
Centre for Mindfulness. And so the work and the research that they do is very much ongoing.
Right.
And that, you know, you can pick up any number of papers and things to read.
Right.
It's just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So if somebody came to you and said, I've heard the word mindfulness, but I have absolutely no idea of what that means to me or how to even start, what would you advise them?
I would say, depending on how somebody learns as well, what their learning preference is.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are umpteen books and things out there, like how I started, and different styles of writing around it as well. So it's definitely one option to start with a book and absorb some of that, and just, you know, rather than trying to sort of take it all in, just seeing what elements of that just lands with you. And just letting that, so it's just like a little seed, and just letting that sort of grow and see how that evolves.
Right.
However, some people might prefer to be guided through something like the MBSR program, which is an 8-week program.
Right.
So that's got a bit more structure to it. So it might be that somebody could enroll on, and there's, I mean, obviously with the current situation, a lot of what's being delivered is online at the moment. So
Right.
that makes it even more accessible, I feel, for people. But even so, there's usually somebody near the local area that's delivering an MBSR program somewhere.
Yeah.
So that might be another option. And the other option is, if you are a bit of a free spirit and you just like to jump in and experiment, then there are hundreds of mindfulness exercises, meditations, things that you can just find on Google. What I'd say is just always check the source of those, and just make sure that they're like a registered mindfulness teacher, or, you know, an MBSR teacher that has recorded those meditations. So yeah, it depends on what the learning style is, but there's loads of options.
And there's movement as well, isn't there? You can do mindfulness movement.
Yeah, so what we do on the MBSR program is that it's a combination of meditation, mindful movement, which I did last week. So we there's things like, it's based on some of the yoga stretches, and it's also based on some of the qigong movements, which is a little bit like Tai Chi. And there's also informal practices as well. We always encourage people to think about, you know, things like when you're having a shower, or cleaning your teeth, or just eating your lunch, just to try and incorporate doing some of those things mindfully into your routine, doing them with intention, in, and being very present and grounded with the, you know, the activity that you're engaging with.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different opportunities to practice mindfulness as well, and meditation is just one way of being able to practice that, I guess.
Yeah. It always surprises me whenever I'm intentionally being mindful of how much the mind sort of jumps to something that happened like yesterday, because it either wasn't done yesterday, or it jumps to something that's way in the future. And actually being present, really, really intentionally present to the moment is something that sounds so easy, but it's not something the mind does with ease.
Yeah. And this is the thing, this is the whole point, isn't it, of practicing mindfulness. So if we go back to that John Kabat-Zinn quote, that to be able to pay attention in a particular way on purpose, it's not easy for us humans to do that, because our minds think and minds wonder, and that's what minds are designed to do.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the non-judgmental bit is really important, because when we're having a go at being intentional and practicing mindfulness, and our minds are doing all of that, zip, zip, zipping, it's really important that we don't bring any judgment to that, and we accept it for what it is. But then the practice becomes sort of like, okay, well, let's just bring back to what I'm doing right now. And no matter how many times that happens, it's constantly training the brain almost to, let's just come back to what I'm doing now. And I think what I find is that I now notice more easily when I'm doing that, when I get caught up in stories or lots of thinking. Whereas before, I think I used to spend a great deal of my time on autopilot.
Right.
And I'm not saying I don't go into autopilot now sometimes, but I think it's almost like building a muscle in the brain when you practice mindfulness, and you start to notice much more quickly when you're going into that autopilot and coming, and then you can just come back. And that's
I
what
know.
it is.
I have a question. It's going to getting the words right now could be. I know how we can use mindfulness to be totally present and stay in the now, and with movement, and like you said, with brushing teeth, eating. How would you create something that you want to be creating for the future mindfully? How can you stay in that present place but have creative thought mindfully?
Wow. I've never been asked this before. This is a really interesting question, isn't it?
Have you ever explored it?
I don't know that I have.
I just
Because I think it's I mean, I think sometimes, like, I can only relate this to so sometimes the meditations that I have, my thoughts take me to a place that I actually quite like. So, you know, it might be something that I envision for myself in the future, that I could see myself doing in my business, or right at the start of this year when I started on my mindfulness teacher training, every time I sat down to meditate, it would take me to me sitting at the front of the room, leading my meditations and teaching. And obviously that's part of creating my own future, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's also really important. I mean, I teach vision board stuff, and I think it's really important to be able to create your own future in your mind first, because that's when we create it in reality.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing for me is it's knowing when, you know what, this is the non-judgmental bit again. I quite like being in that place, and it's okay to do so. As long as I notice that that's where my mind went to, and when I'm ready to bring it back, I bring it back.
Yeah.
And I notice the effects that that might have had on my body as well, because obviously you're bringing up emotions when you're in that state.
Yeah.
So it's more in the noticing and the awareness that makes it a present future experience.
Yeah. I just wondered, you know, if you sat down with a notepad or whatever you use to create, and just, meditated and then created mindfully.
I think I journal quite a bit after my meditations as well. I find that really useful, and what I journal about is the things that I notice happening in my meditation. So whether that's in my body or whether to do with my thoughts or whatever. Now, obviously, the difference with mindfulness meditation, what I would say is that I'm not sitting down with the intention of going into the future or creating anything. But if that then happens when I'm practicing my mindfulness meditation, then I think it's okay to just go with that for a period of time.
Yeah. I just wondered if I'm talking completely hypothetically. If you were creating, or, if I was, I'm not putting it on you, even if I was creating, say, a program, and then as I was writing things down, really noticing how that felt in my body.
Yeah.
And it could be that in my body it didn't feel right. So,
and that's a really interesting thing to be able to tap into, isn't it? It's actually really helpful, because I suppose it's tied in with what we call intuition, isn't it? When something doesn't feel right. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to explore, Jill. Thank you.
And I mean, as anybody who's already come before you on these interviews, the questions aren't pre-planned or talked about in any way. So what comes up organically. And mindfully today.
That's it. We're in the moment.
Yeah, we're definitely in the moment.
It's so as a coach as well, and I know that there's some people in this group that are coaches,
Yeah.
Being able to coach in presently and in the moment is incredibly important, I think. And I know that when I've been in that place where I'm thinking ahead with a client, I've stopped being in the moment and listening fully in the moment. So, and what we're doing here now, just being in the moment and chatting, means that you just get that sense of connection with somebody, don't you? And you're just doing a bit of a dance.
Yeah.
And that's what I think happens in a coaching context with your client as well. And it just kind of prompted me to think about that, because it has made a difference to the way I work as a coach as well.
Yeah. And it is very much what you said, because when you're present and you're in the moment and things aren't planned, you're not worried about what's going to come up, because you're present. You're just trusting that it's going to be that back and forth communication.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference too, doesn't it?
Definitely. Trust is a big word there.
Yeah.
An important word as well. Trusting yourself, trusting the process, trusting what unfolds in the future,
Yeah. And I'm really excited about the thought of creating mindfully, because I've never intentionally done that.
The other thing that springs to mind about that is, so I think with mindfulness, there's a set of attitudes and qualities that we talk about repeatedly throughout the program.
Right.
And one of those is having a beginner's mind. And that made me think what you just said as well about that particular attitude or quality of bringing that sense of a beginner's mind to everything. So you experience life with just a real sense of curiosity. And just seeing kind of like what happens and where things go, but not sort of preempting things too much, or having any sort of certain expectations about a particular experience. And we do talk about that in the sense of meditation, about bringing a beginner's mind, so every meditation is different. But I also think that translates into what you were just saying and about life in general. And if you were creating a project, for example, bringing a beginner's mind to that would be quite an interesting thing to do, wouldn't it?
It would, because if you think about it, most projects or programs or anything that anybody wants to build within their business to put out into the world, the majority, and I'm not saying it's everybody, but the majority will do courses and classes on how to. But coming from it in that way, you would be the sole creator.
It's human nature, isn't it, I suppose, to some extent, again, because of the way we've been conditioned to think about, I've got to skill up, I've got to go and read all the books and do all the courses, and I need the knowledge and I need this information. But actually, just having that trust in the process and just bringing a beginner's mind to that piece of work.
Trusting that, we have all the answers within, and yet we always search outside.
And one of the other qualities and attitudes we talk about is patience. Not one of my fortes.
Not mine.
But again, this idea though that it's okay to allow things to just unfold in their own time and going at our own pace. And this has been a huge learning curve for me, because I've always been a sort of a quick fix, quick response kind of person. I guess it was sort of right around the job that I used to do was quite fast paced.
Yeah.
And even the way in which we are taught as trainee teachers through the Mindfulness Network is that, the teaching is very much sort of like, oh, well, here's some information. Just see which bits of that lands with you, and just trust that those are the bits that you need to know right now.
Right.
And what course have you ever been on in your life where a tutor has ever said that to you? It was like, wow, this is just revelationary.
Yeah.
Because, history sort of dictates that when you go on a course, you need to learn everything by the letter, and there's a test at the end, and, all that. But no, it's so, and so the whole training that I'm kind of engaged in right now is, again, an embodiment of mindfulness in itself.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing, really, as an approach to learning.
It is. I mean, how often do we look in a training or a course? What's the structure? We look to see what the structure is and actually judge it on that structure.
We do. And then we are judged against the criteria of that structure to see whether we're competent or not.
Yeah. And that just turns it completely on its head. And it makes perfect sense, because everybody's in a different part of their journey. So what's right for you would be wrong for me, but we'd be forced to learn something the same way.
Yeah.
And then judged on that. And it would be nothing wrong in either of us, just that we're being forced to be in the same part of the journey, whether we're there or not.
Yeah.
That's that's really like
it is. And I wish that I wish I could just the only way I could it's really difficult to describe the whole learning experience on this teacher training journey. I just kind of wish that we could bring it somehow into the mainstream education system, and that people could experience this type of learning for themselves, because it's yeah, I mean, of course there's criteria to be met and things like that. It's part of, you know, Bangor University, and they do things academically. However, the approach and the style of teaching and learning is so experiential. And I wish we could do more of that and be open to that more often.
Yeah, because there'd be some subjects where, you know, you would be like way ahead, but there'd be the availability to be somewhere way behind or seemingly behind in another subject, rather than needing to be at this one point.
Yeah.
It would change so much, wouldn't it?
It's just blown my mind, Jill.
I don't know if anybody's joined us, Louise, because Morag is here.
Oh, hi.
She had a raisin mindfully.
Yeah, that's what we do on week 1 of the course.
Yeah, I remember doing on my positive psychology. Actually, we ate a blueberry mindfully, and that was part of the positive psychology.
It's ever such a funny exercise to do, I think, and it's received in many different ways as well. Some people are like, what? Others like, and again, like, I've done that exercise, I don't know how many times now, and every experience is different. And the last experience really stuck in my mind, because I went for the biggest raisin. And the smallest, we had 2 basically, and then I was given a smaller one. And this is so funny though, isn't it? Like, again, human nature. So the biggest raisin, it's like, oh, already preempted, can't wait to eat this, it's going to be really juicy, and like, I'm already building this whole story around this raisin, and then I put it in my mouth, and oh my gosh, what a disappointment. A disappointment. It was like, so not very sweet. It was just like, the yak had a pasty taste to it. It was weird. And then again, there's an experience of, you know, all these stories are coming up then about an unpleasant. So I'm bringing all this judgment, aren't I? Because it's like, oh gosh, I wanted something sweeter, and so I want to get rid of that unpleasant experience. And then I put the smallest one in my mouth, and it was the sweetest raisin I have ever eaten. And I was just like, that just proves that the judgment was there.
Yeah.
So it is actually, you know, it's that kind of exercise where people roll their eyes a little bit and go, oh, that one. But it can be quite a rich learning experience.
Yeah.
In terms of what it can tell you, what it can show you.
Yeah. And where, as a human, our expectations are.
Definitely. And where our judgments are, and where, you know, the stories that we create, these, you know, that's not bringing a beginner's mind to it, is it? Because that's me creating a set of expectations around this poor little raisin.
Yeah, but it wasn't the beginner's mind, was it?
No, it wasn't. It didn't live up to, I had these expectations. So, but if you translate something like that into something in a bigger aspect of life, it just goes to show that, you know, where those levels of stress and overwhelm and all that comes from, because we've created all this, you know, these expectations and things around an experience.
And it's not necessarily true, is it?
And there's also this one of the other attitudes and qualities around acceptance as well. Is it acceptance, or no, sorry, letting go, because we want to have all the pleasant experiences all of the time, and then the unpleasant experiences, or what we label as unpleasant, we kind of just like want to get rid of and not have those. And so we purposely ask people throughout the program to start tuning into those pleasant and unpleasant experiences and noticing what happens in our body and what our thoughts are around that. And that's really interesting as well, because, you know, really letting go of that idea that things should be in a certain way, or that we need to fix it in some way, is really key. You know, you hear people say, oh, I had a crap meditation.
Yeah.
Well, what was the expectation then to start with before you meditated?
Yeah. It's already prejudged.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't you think with an unpleasant experience to a pleasant experience, you would never know a pleasant experience if you've never had an unpleasant one?
I absolutely agree with that.
So
how boring would life be?
But you wouldn't know that they were all pleasant.
No, I agree with that. I do.
You wouldn't know. They could be all unpleasant. And you'd have no way of knowing. And then it's still personal, isn't it? Because what is a pleasant experience for you, I might say, oh, I wouldn't like that, or I didn't enjoy that. And it's the same with taking on your fears. You know, is it a fear, or is it something you really just don't want to do?
Yeah.
And to go and do something you really don't want to do because you're saying, well, it's a fear, I'm going to face it, I'll do it. I don't think it moves you through anything, because it's just simply, I don't really want to do that. And I think that's fine to keep something like that there, something you don't want to do. It's, to me, that's a boundary.
Yeah.
As opposed to moving through a fear.
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that. If I share with you as well this tick, I always like pronouncing the name, like Thich Nhat Hanh. I think that's how you say it.
Right.
So he's, you know, that you've probably heard of him. So he's like in the Buddhist world, like very popular. His definition of mindfulness, because it kind of fits in with what you were just saying. So his definition is that living mindfully and with concentration, we see a deeper reality, and we're able to witness impermanence without fear, anger, or despair. So it's very much focused on I feel like his definition is more focused on the feelings side of things, but also that recognition. And again, what we were saying about the acceptance of those feelings, but the impermanence of it all as well.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite an interesting point. We often forget. I think we just feel like something's just going to be here forever.
Yeah.
There's no light at the end of the tunnel with this fear or whatever it is we're dealing with. I mean, take the current situation, you know.
It's not permanent.
Yeah, and I think the suffering comes because people feel that it's just never going to end, or creating those stories around. And then, of course, that adds to the fear and the, you know, whatever else emotions there are.
Yeah, that's true. Well, this has been really enlightening. And I've certainly got something I'm going to explore. But I know you've got a class coming up soon, haven't you?
So I do practice mindfulness sessions on a Tuesday at 12 for about 40 minutes, and anybody's welcome to come and join us in that. It is 40 minutes at the moment because of the Zoom
Yeah.
limits. I'm hoping to get the paid platform at some point, so hopefully I can have an hour. But so yeah, just a drop in really of a Tuesday lunchtime, just to ground and connect, and just an opportunity to practice. So if anybody wants to join us, more than happy. And I'm also hoping to start an MBSR program around mid-May. So it's going to be online, of course. It's actually going to be the first one that I do online. So if anybody feels that they would like to be part of that, it will be a really reduced cost, because obviously I just need to cover the costs of Zoom and my supervision as well, my insurance. Other than that, if you're happy to be part of a cohort of, I would say guinea pigs. I was trying to think of a better word.
A beta program.
A beta program is the posh phraseology. So yeah, if you'd like to be part of that, then drop me a line, and I'd love to set that up. Well, I am setting it up for mid-May, so
yeah. And maybe you can drop your information links into the comments after, and if there's any recommended reading or resources, just pop them in the comments for people. I know Morag's here and Carolyn's here, and we're already with you on a Tuesday. And you know, I've had such amazing experiences on those Tuesdays. And it's you know, I would recommend anybody coming to do mindfulness with you. So
thank you, Jill.
yeah, but thank you so much for joining me, and I have to put my glasses on. Oh, Carolyn's got a question for you.
Yeah.
What's the difference between meditation and mindfulness? She said, I have some baggage with the word mindfulness because my mind is usually full. She said, maybe you covered it while I wasn't here.
I think we probably did talk about the mindful bit, as in the mind is always full and always wondering, and that's absolutely okay. So really for me, meditation is just one way to practice mindfulness, to be mindful.
And the way I understood mindfulness, different to meditation, from the guy I learned meditation with, was meditation is, well, we know what meditation is, but mindfulness is noticing what happens while you're meditating. So it's being aware of what's happening in your body and in your mind while you're meditating.
Yeah.
So it's, and then when we do it in movement, it's when you've done it, it's, you always say, where do you feel it in your body? So it's the noticing of in that present moment. Yeah.
Explained perfectly, Jill.
Oh, thank you.
I agree, because that's the bit that I said. It's building that muscle in the brain, isn't it? It's the keep noticing, the keep coming back to the present moment, keep grounding into the present moment, into the body, noticing when the mind's wandering off, escorting it back very gently without judgment. You know, all of those things is the practice for me. And we can do that in the form of meditation, or we can do it in other ways. And of course, there's other styles of meditation that people enjoy that isn't part of the mindfulness that I teach. Because some people use meditation in very different ways, don't they, for things like visualization, for example, or affirmation, or hypnosis type style meditation. So yeah, I hope that explains it, Carolyn.
Yeah. Does have we
and it's used interchangeably, it is.
Yeah, Carolyn says Tuesday rocks. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And yes, being the observer, the witness. And she said she's met loads of other mindfulness teachers, and she says, love you.
Oh.
But I think that the thing is with the mind being full is a matter of, I was told not to see the thoughts like clouds, and that they're thoughts like clouds blowing across on a windy day. That's all thoughts are in the mind. They're just clouds passing through.
Yeah.
And it's only when a thought comes and then we build a story around that thought that we then go into the thought, as opposed to just observing it and not minding it be there, not trying to make it anything, or not trying to push it away.
Yeah.
It's just that cloud of thought.
Absolutely.
Another one will follow. So and Morag says meditation is just a tool. I'm not quite sure I understand that.
I can see where she's coming from with that. I can.
Yeah, but is she saying mindfulness is a tool to meditation is a tool to mindfulness? And now she's saying it comes in many shapes and sizes and for different purposes. Yes, but it is. Oh, it's all happening. Carolyn says sometimes meditation is focusing on a phrase.
Yeah. There's so many different types of meditation. Some people would argue with that statement of meditation being a tool. I would actually go with that, because obviously I'm teaching it in that way, that it's almost a tool to practice mindfulness. But I think there are some that would go.
Well, I see meditation as a way of being, and I don't quite know how a way of being is a tool. So that's a whole different discussion there.
We'll have to come back and do it.
Yeah, Morag, yeah, you'll have to come and explore that a little bit more deeply there. But I think we have to let Louise go now, guys. And thank you for joining and making it interesting. And yeah, there's lots of different thoughts, and nothing is wrong. And yeah, I mean, we can look at those questions with a beginner's mind.
Absolutely.
Yes. I wonder what Morag thinks of the beginner's mind. I don't know if she's chomping at the bit now.
Knowing how she brings a sense of curiosity,
yeah,
and in her questions and things, and to her
oh, I know.
I'd say that's one of her natural kind of qualities, to bring that beginner's mind.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So yes, thank you, Louise. And yes, thank you, and thank you, Carolyn and Morag. And if anybody's here on Facebook isn't showing me, I'm sorry I'm not mentioning you. Morag loves beginner's mind. Yes, I know. Morag is that curious person there. So, and Carolyn's, I can't say that word, Carolyn. Sorry, I'm not reading it out, but loads to talk about with the beginner's mind. Yeah, I'm afraid to say that. I sometimes have trouble saying words, and I don't want it to come out wrong. So you can read it in the comments after, Louise. But thank you, everybody. And we will see you again.
Much love.
Bye for now. That's the live stopped.
Thank you.
And I'll stop the recording.